All right, so welcome to another episode of Full Circle Podcast. It's your favorite brother, Joseph, once again right here. And, today, as we're picking up from last week, we're going to be talking about part 2 of our conversation on immigration. Now, I know we dove into a lot of different things and we discussed a lot. So I want to give a little bit of a recap if you haven't heard that first episode, which if you haven't, go check it out right now. What you doing? What's going on? In the first episode, we talked a little bit about the contradictory relationship that the United States has with immigration. In one sense of the word, it's welcome, come in, we want you, the Statue of Liberty, being almost a symbol for that historically. But how the United States has oftentimes exploited immigrant labor, mistreated immigrants, and really benefited economically off of immigrant labor, while politically continuing to shame and to denigrate people that are coming, that are looking for an honest form of living or to escape persecution. And so we covered that. We also covered the history of some of the policies that have led to where we are right now, as well as we took a look at just different administrations all the way from the 1930s to the present day, and how their economic policies as well as their immigration policies have had an impact on the debate currently, right? So what are we going to talk about today? I really looked at some of the things that we had discussed previously, and I wanted to just come at it from a bit more of a systemic position, like understanding what the systems are currently. And we're going to dive today into the policies, the agencies, and the procedures that immigrants currently have to face when they're coming into the country. We're also going to talk about the model minority myth. We are going to talk about the reasons for why some of these massive pushes are being made by the Trump administration to limit the amount of immigrants that are coming in, as well as push out some of the people that are already here and end birthright citizenship. And we're also just going to talk very, very quickly about solutions, just continuing off of that track. Before we do that, though, I just want to say, thank God. I am so happy to be looking like a human being again. We were working on this film. My friend Sam and I were working on this film, and he told me not to shave, not to get a haircut, not to get nothing. And man, it was starting to overgrow. It was starting to get out there. I was starting to look whack. So I'm glad to be back here. Got that fresh cut. Shout out to my man Mitch over at the barbershop over at Big O over in Burbank. If you need a haircut, if you're in the area, and if you're not looking for a haircut that'll break your bank, but it'll also have you coming out looking pretty good, I recommend checking them out. Okay, with that being said, y'all all know I love to shout out my favorite people and show love on this show, so we're going to keep the tradition of that alive. All right, so moving forward, let's dive right into it. What does the current immigration system look like in America? I know a lot of people typically look at this situation, and the conversation is usually related to crossing the border, people that are coming in through caravans, right? But a large amount of that has actually changed. I'm not saying there's not border encounters. We obviously have them. But a large amount of that has actually declined over a period of time. Now, before we dive into that a little bit and talk about it, I'm going to take a drink of water. Bless God. Water always helps. Okay, so how do we divide these two things, right? So there's two different forms that I want to tap in here, and it's part of the legal framework of how we address this in America. But the immigration system, as is presently constructed, is divided into two categories. The first category is family-based immigration, and the second category is employment-based immigration. Now, what that looks like, and I'll start with the first one here, what that looks like is two different forms of the ways that people can either, bring their family here through achieving citizenship or through getting, lawful permanent residency, or you can essentially come here on a work opportunity, right? So family-based immigration is a provision where you can become a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, and then by doing so, you can sponsor some family members for immigration. The problem with this system is that there's so many backlogs, right? So you could put your information in, you could enter into, you could enter in to sponsor your family through this system, but there are some people who are waiting decades, sometimes as long as 20 years, to reunite with their family. And if you leave the country before this time is properly set, before even your citizenship and everything is properly taken care of, you might lose an opportunity to come back into the country again. And so this puts a lot of stress and a lot of strain on families or individuals that are trying to get their families from where they are to the United States after getting citizenship or permanent residency. For example, here, siblings of U.S. citizens from countries like Mexico and the Philippines are sometimes facing wait times, as I mentioned previously, up to 20 years. So you're already dealing with that facet, right? Like, imagine being separated from your family for up to 20 years. You haven't seen them. You came here searching for a better life, searching for a work opportunity. You did it legally. You went through that process, but now you're separated from your family because of backlogs. This specifically tends to really impact people that are from Mexico and the Philippines primarily. So usually Asian countries or Central Latin American countries, right? So that's the first one. That's family-based immigration. The second most popular form, right, is, at least through a legal sense, is the employment-based system. And that employment-based system here allows U.S. employers to sponsor foreign workers for permanent residency. So there are opportunities for employers, corporations, to sponsor people that are coming here looking to work and get new opportunities. But the problem is the cap on that right now is $140,000 per year. That's way below demand. Obviously, we have tons of people that want to come here. They want opportunities. They want to work. They're looking for a better opportunity to get upward mobility for them and their families. But because of this, because you have long waits that are occurring as a result of this, this type of impact has been affecting mostly people from India and China. Okay. Now, another way that people can attempt to get around this is through temporary visa programs, which the United States offers, right? So this is usually for workers, for people that are students, and also visitors, right? So I'm going to break down a couple of these really quickly in case you didn't know. There goes that chime. The H-1B visa is for skilled workers in specialty occupations. So right now, there are people that have great skill sets. They're coming here. They're either going to be working in technology. They might be even working to help in architecture, right? But the problem with this is the program is oversubscribed, and there's a lottery system that determines who gets in. So it's kind of almost like rolling the dice and seeing essentially who in this broad program will get in. So yes, we have great workers. We do have some of the best and the brightest that are entering into the program, but not everybody will necessarily get a fair shot based just on their merit alone. Some of it is as a result of the fact that it's by random choice and selection. And because of the backlogs that already exist, it becomes extremely enormous and complicated. The next way, or the next form of visa right here, there's two of them I'm going to mention as we're talking about this. The H-2A and the H-2B visas. Those are for seasonal agricultural and non-agricultural workers, respectively. Now, we need agricultural labor here in the United States. It is just a fact that most, like, standard born in this country American workers are not going to go out and labor in the fields to go and produce or to pick what has been produced to put on the shelves at the grocery store. That is a reality that for many Americans is very, very far removed, right? So if you are a farmer and if you work in that industry, okay, that's something that you're extremely familiar with, right? But for the average American who goes to the grocery store after a long day at work, or who might even live in the city or the suburbs, this is something that is so far outside of our realm of understanding. We don't even think about the supply chains and the pipeline by which our food goes from being planted in the ground to sprouting through seed to then being transported across the country into our grocery stores, and even the costs that are associated with it. And so you have these folks that are willing and able to work. And a lot of times, because these companies, these corporations can pay these folks a lower and really an unfair wage, because most Americans will not work these jobs, a lot of times these folks will come in and they will take those jobs. Of course, we mentioned the Latino Chicano workers in my last episode on this. And that's pretty much what happened through the Bracero program. You had folks that were here, they were coming in and they were working, but they were exploited. There were exploitative labor practices and lack of worker protections during this period of time. People were subjected to long hours in, the blistering heat, and oftentimes not even getting fair breaks and worker protections under these conditions. So this is another example of a visa. It is an opportunity for people to work, but these are the conditions that they face. Okay. Now we also have the F1 visa. And like I said, I'm going to go through these really quickly because we got a lot to cover today, but I want to make sure we're tapping in on this and we're being thorough. The F1 visa is typically for international students, and it's a great opportunity for people to come here. They can, get graduation or get opportunities after graduation, so they can come here, enter into the education system, benefit from it. The problem, though, is they usually face challenges transitioning into work visas after graduation, because this F1 visa is just for educational purposes. And so there's a lot of barriers here. There's a lot of legal roadblocks that immigrants tend to face when trying to really climb the ladder and make progress, even if they are doing it in a legal framework. Okay. Now, I want to shift a little bit from these aspects and talk to you about what we typically are hearing about in the news: asylum and refugee systems, or the system for asylum seekers and refugees. So the United States historically has been a haven for people that have sought asylum. I mean, we look at a lot of the conflicts that have happened globally. We look at what's happening in Ukraine right now, and how folks that are fleeing the war, that have fled the war in Ukraine, they have been granted asylum, or they have been granted political refuge here in the United States while that war is going on, right? So there's a massive process that people have to go under, and sometimes they even face really, really harsh and difficult conditions, because it's not as easy as it seems to go through all these steps, right? So for asylum seekers, they have to prove that they face persecution in their home country based off of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Okay. So they have to essentially showcase, hey, I'm right now being oppressed. I'm dealing with a life-threatening situation, or one that is detrimental to my existence, right? The problem with this is right now is that currently the backlog, this is a crazy number, the backlog of asylum in America right now is 1.6 million. That's 1.6 million cases. And some people are waiting years to get a hearing for these cases, while still back at home in the places that they came from. It's not suitable for them to return during these conditions, right? The next part of this system here are refugees. The United States resettles refugees through a separate program, of course, but admissions have plummeted in recent years, okay? In 2020, just to give you guys a little bit of some context here, in 2020, with the refugee program, the Trump administration set the refugee cap at a historic low of 15,000. Now, it was reset under President Biden, but 15,000, just think about that right now, with all the the catastrophic events that are happening globally. And we're not the only country that takes refugees. There's tons of other countries that take refugees globally. But right now, if you look at what has happened since Trump has come back into office, there seems to be a push to increase mass deportations and have them hold a historic level, but also to discourage refugees from coming to the United States of America. And there's no signs to me right now under this current administration that would prove that Trump is open to inviting these people back into the country or encouraging more refugees to come in with open arms, right? So just to give you guys a little bit of context here, immigration enforcement right now is carried out by, as we know, ICE and Customs and Border Protection. The problem with the way that this is carried out, while we do have to enforce our border laws, the U.S. currently detains an average, these are some wild numbers here, but the U.S. currently detains an average of 55,000 immigrants daily. 55,000 immigrants daily. That is a crazy number. Now, the reason why people often criticize these detention centers is because of the fact that they have poor conditions. We've heard stories about people being separated from their families, people being packed together in these very unsanitary conditions, while many times they are either, waiting to be sent back home or they're awaiting asylum. I remember a story when I was in Chicago, or a time when I was in Chicago, I was staying close to the downtown area, and I was staying at an apartment that was not far from a detention center. And so when I would drive past, you would see people lined up all the way to the entrance, people lined up, people, with their families. And of course, it was really, really hot outside when I was there. But some of the conditions that we're researching here, that we're talking about, I visualize with my own eyes people dealing with these circumstances. And of course, I wasn't inside. But if the line of people wrapped around the building that were living in tents just to get inside to have an opportunity to be seen and to be taken care of, if that is something that is so massive, and we're talking about right now 55,000 people that are detained daily, the narrative of a comprehensive system by which people have to just hop in line and wait their turn and come in legally, it's a narrative that sounds good in the sense of it's black and white. But when you really start looking at the different hues, the grays of the situation, it becomes painfully clear that the system is broken and that people are really falling into the cracks of the broken system and really being punished for it. So right now, with that being said, on top of that, ICE conducts hundreds of thousands of deportations annually, though, of course, with the new administration, those priorities seem to have grown and seem to be even higher, right? Trump is, let's just put it this way, Trump wants to be the number one deporter of immigrants in American history. He wants to be the number one deporter of people that have come here to the country that are undocumented. And even right now, there are people that they have their green cards. There was a gentleman recently, he was a pro-Palestinian activist, and the Trump administration was trying to deport him out of the United States for his rhetoric. But here's the challenge. If he has a green card, he cannot just be deported. And so a judge temporarily struck that down or halted it pending further review. So as I mentioned before, the moves that Trump is making are unprecedented. And it seems like he is really, he's not trying to budge on this particular issue here. So with that being said, it's a complicated issue because at the federal level, it's something that you have to cooperate with state and local governments to enforce, right? And so right now there are, specifically in blue states, which it's unfortunate that we even have to call them blue states because we're supposed to be one whole country. But because of the politics in our country right now, there has been a lot more talk in recent years about red states and blue states, right? And so you have some states, typically blue states, that tend to adopt sanctuary city policies so that they will not cooperate with the federal government, especially with Trump's federal government right now on immigration policies. So you have states like California, states like New York, states like Washington, for example, and Colorado that tend to not cooperate, or at least tend to have stricter policies that will prevent the federal government from just coming in and wreaking havoc on these undocumented populations. Whereas you have states like Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Alabama. Not necessarily sure why you would want to immigrate there, just saying. But states like those tend to have stricter policies that crack down on immigrant populations and cooperate with the federal government, at least the Trump's federal government at this particular point in time. The criticism that I would say, and it's a fair criticism, I've heard it most broadly, and it's also my criticism, the system right now is overly complicated. There's too many bureaucratic hurdles to get over, and it's difficult for people that are even well qualified, like some of the best people with no criminal record, people that are upstanding, to get over. It's inequitable because of the backlogs. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, these backlogs historically tend to negatively and disproportionately affect people from Asia and Latin America. The policies are also inhumane because you have family separation, you have prolonged detention, you have unsanitary conditions. In some cases, I believe it was during the Trump administration, the first one, people were being locked in cages, right? There were reports of that. And of course, the system has not undergone comprehensive reform in decades. And so right now, it's difficult for them to really handle immigration workers, people that are in charge. It's difficult to handle all of the migratory patterns that are happening as a result of the changes right now in the economic conditions in different countries, people escaping political violence, people escaping, gang violence, so on and so forth, or just looking for a better life. So if you want to know more about this, and I always include articles here, you can go and look up the article, How the U.S. Immigration System Works, from the Council on Foreign Relations. And you can also look at the article, The Backlog in U.S. Immigration Courts, by the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse. Now, I want to talk about something that it's very, very important that I tap on this for a second, because there's not just systemic aspects in terms of the way things work, but there's also racial dynamics. There are cultural dynamics as to the way that immigrants have been treated, the same as with many Black Americans have been treated here in this country. And so I would be totally remiss if I just talked to you guys about this from a system aspect and not a systemic aspect. And so we're going to dive into that very, very quickly. I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with this term, the model minority myth, right? But if you're not familiar with it, the model minority myth, it's typically used to showcase certain populations, specifically Asian Americans, as being universally successful, hardworking, and law-abiding. But it's a stereotype generally that portrays some immigrant groups as better than other immigrant groups, right? Now, you may wonder where some of this came from. You may wonder where some aspects of this originated. And so I want to go really quickly here, and I want to showcase this. This started as far back as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. So I made some notes here just to kind of give y'all some information. If you're not familiar with the Chinese Exclusion Act, it was the first major immigration policy that the United States had. And the law explicitly banned basically an entire ethnic group of people from entering the country, which were the Chinese. The act was born, once again, out of economic and racial fears. So this has always been how the policies go. It's always based off of these people are going to come in, they're either going to take your jobs or they're going to take over the country. And so that using those fears to stoke the fires of anger and hatred, these policies and rhetoric were used to drive up support for the immigration of people that were, for the deportation and the exclusion of people that were looking to come into the country and work legally, have a fair shot, and find a better life. And so what ended up happening here is that Chinese laborers were scapegoated for taking jobs and driving down wages. And so as a result of this, it barred immigrants from China from entering the United States and denied the ones that were already here from the possibility of receiving citizenship. Okay, so the reason why this ties into, or the way that this ties into the model minority myth is that after, or during rather, World War II, right, there was all this negativity against Chinese immigrants that came here. It institutionalized racism against them. They were portrayed as foreigners. They were portrayed as unassimilable, and they were a threat to American society. So a threat to essentially national security, if you will. And these communities face violence, they face exclusion, and they face discrimination for decades in the United States. So we're talking about from 1882 all the way until World War II, okay? With that being said, this act was repealed in 1943 when, during World War II, the Chinese became an ally of the United States against Japan. Now, I want you to keep this in mind. This repeal was not just because people, it wasn't an altruistic thing. It was like, oh my God, we feel so bad for the Chinese. We've done so much wrong. We want to come clean and we want to confess our sins. No. This is where the model minority myth comes in. The Chinese became an ally of the United States. And so because of that, the United States wanted to bolster U.S.-Chinese relations to continue to have support for the war, because China and Japan have always been enemies. But it also would use the Chinese as the good Asians and the Japanese as the bad Asians. And that was the narrative that was propagated during the war. And so because of this dichotomy laid the groundwork for the model minority myth. This has not just been applied to Chinese and Japanese Americans. This has now been applied to Asian immigrants from multiple countries. And it's also been used against other populations, such as African and Haitian immigrants, those from the Middle East, to say, look at these folks over here. They come, they work hard. They're doing a great job. They're smart. And the narrative has been used against those such as Latinos that come here. Even though Latinos tend to be some of the hardest working people, taking on multiple jobs for less pay, sometimes very little to no pay, just so that they can keep themselves afloat and take care of their families and climb the ladder. But these narratives have been used for decades to divide these populations. So with that being said, it's very, very interesting to know and understand, because I know we always talk about, once again, Latinos. We always talk about, that seems to be the forefront of the narrative. But this has also impacted Haitians. This has also impacted Nigerians. This has also impacted people that are coming from all over the African continent, people that are coming from Europe, especially with what's going on in Ukraine right now. But Latinos tend to be the focus of the conversation. And there is a reason for that. There is a racial reason for that. I want to give y'all a quick statistic here, because this is very, very important to know. Right now, there are demographic shifts that are taking place in the United States of America. And for some people, specifically those that believe in the Great Replacement theory, I'll talk about that in a second, but for some people, there is a fear that Latinos will take over the United States in terms of majority and population. And if that's not the fear only aimed at Latinos, there is a fear that the United States is going to become a majority minority population, as is said. I hate the term minorities because no one is a minority in that sense. No population or people group should be addressed in that fashion. But in terms, if we're talking strictly based off of numbers, this is the case. Because right now there are more people, they're having either mixed marriages in the United States of America, or more people are essentially becoming racially ambiguous, right? Or what you have is there are more people in the Latino community. Some of it is because of religion and beliefs, especially those that subscribe to Catholicism, where they're not pro-abortion primarily. So people are having more kids, they're having more families, and as a result, there's a growth in the population, whereas the white population in America tends to be either dwindling or staying fairly stagnant. I'm going to go over some of these statistics really quickly to give you some context here. Okay. Right now, what we have is, and this is according to a 2020 report by the Brookings Institution, no single racial or ethnic group makes up more than 50% of the United States. Right now, according to a 2020 report, the white population in the United States of America is projected to fall below 50% by 2045. That is the first time that has ever happened in the United States. Okay. Now, as of this 2020 report, there was another report that came out by the U.S. Census Bureau in 2020 that also said the white population in America has declined for the first time in history, dropping by 8.6% since 2010. Okay. Meanwhile, Asian and Latino populations have grown significantly, with Latinos making up 18.7% of the population, and Asians are making up 6.1% of the population. The projection here is that if these numbers continue to move forward as they are right now, if they're still going up that track, by 2045, okay, that's not that long from now, by 2045, the white population is expected to make up just 49.7% of the U.S., while Latinos will account for 24.6%, Black people 13.1%, and Asian people 7.9%. Okay, now once again, that article is "The U.S. White Majority Will Soon Disappear Forever" by the Brookings Institute. Okay, the reason why this is problematic is because there has been a lot of rhetoric surrounding this, specifically against Latinos, because of the fact that there are some, especially a lot of people that are on the far right wing, that fear that white Americans are going to lose cultural and political dominance in America. And so you hear some of these narratives such as "Make America Great Again." It sounds on the surface great. Okay, fantastic. Now, I'm going to slow down right there. If you have been part of any demographic that has been oppressed in this country, any demographic that has been discriminated against in this country, kept in slavery, or subjugated to any form of denigration, you already know the term "Make America Great Again" is fairly obsolete and irrelevant, because for us in America, our treatment as cultural groups, as ethnic groups, only gets better as time goes forward. We have a lot of work to do, but from where we have come to where we are now, I'm not walking down the street and having to pass off from the sidewalk to the street when a white person passes me, or being called a nigger every day. That was the experience my dad had growing up in the 1950s, pre the civil rights era, and also during the civil rights era in the South. And my dad tells me these stories of when he would have to drink from colored fountains, when he would have to, even if he was top in his class, my dad was valedictorian, he would still be told he couldn't pursue and achieve what he wanted because of his skin, because of his race. And so for us in this country, if you belong to that group of people, life gets better as time goes forward. So this narrative of making it great again and shifting backwards towards old policies in many ways seems dangerous. And we look at it almost with a sense of bated breath and concern, because those times were not better for us. Those times were not good for us. They were terrifying in many ways. And so with this particular situation, a lot of these thoughts, a lot of this anti-immigrant rhetoric that has been spilled out there is a result of fear. There is the great replacement theory that essentially it's a conspiracy theory, but in recent years, and especially once again, since Trump has gained power and now come back to power, this has gained traction. And it is a claim that elites are deliberately replacing white populations with non-white immigrants. And the whole focus of this is then for those people to come in, to then be able to take over and vote. And then by doing so, they will be able to institute policies and institutions that completely remove white people from really the majority or remove them from relevance. Okay? These have clearly been debunked. Clearly, they've been debunked. But here's the thing. When you've enjoyed the majority, when you have made yourself the majority in multiple places all over the world, and you have, and like I said, I'm not talking about all white people here, but I'm talking about just in terms of what has happened globally, in terms of a system that has been set up by mostly European populations. When you now are being faced with a shift in terms of the balance of power, there can be a fear and a paranoia that you will no longer be relevant. And as a result, you may face some of the consequences, right? And not as individual people groups, but face some of the consequences of your historic behavior. Now, I'm not pro this whole idea that all white people are bad and that, if you're born, you are the oppressor and all this other stuff. I think a lot of that is a bunch of nonsense, right? Because there are opportunities for everybody today to take a step in changing, not rewriting history, but changing the future so that history can look different. But I do believe it is important that there are people today, if you are a white person, and that's your historical background, right? You look at it, that may have not run in your family per se, but you're somebody that's your identification. That might be your general cultural overall background. If you get this information and you see what is being done wrong, if you're not part of that, if that's not your viewpoint, if that's not the way that you see things, then I believe that not just as a white person, but as a human being, you have a responsibility to educate yourself about what's going on in the world and to stand up for other people. Just like it's my responsibility as a person, but also as a black man, to stand up for what's going on in my community and stand up for what's going on right now in the Latino and the Asian community, because it's not about race at this particular point in this discussion. This is a human conversation. But some of us, if we're honest, we have advantages because of systems that have been set up to give us advantages. And so it's all of our responsibility. It is on all of us to use the opportunity and the power that we have to make sure life is better for other people. That's the bottom line here. And so because of this, as I mentioned before, there are some people with their policies, there are some people with their political rhetoric and their immigration policies, such as Trump, things like building border walls, ending family-based immigration, getting rid of birthright citizenship, for example, and reducing refugee admissions. They are using policies and these fears, these ethnic fears, this xenophobia, to justify an intent and to stand behind a fear that they have justified as correct, as right. And so this is something that, as I mentioned before, we have to address it. We have to look at this And we have to see it as something that not only is wrong, but we have to see it as something that needs to be addressed by each and every one of us. Okay. Now, we've got a couple of stories and a couple of examples of this. Where some of these examples play out, you might say. How do they play out? There are narratives that immigrants commit crimes. We talked about this before. Immigrants are least likely, actually, they're less likely than American citizens to commit crimes because of how it affects their ability to gain citizenship, how it affects their ability to stay in the country. But there are people such as Stephen Miller and Donald Trump, even J.D. Vance has been behind this. There are people that are behind this, Steve Bannon. They all work with Trump and his ecosystem. There are people that have propagated these ideologies using anecdotes instead of statistics. They like to use statistics when it benefits them, but they like to also ignore anecdotes when it doesn't benefit them. And then they'll turn around and use anecdotes when it does. One anecdote that has been highlighted particularly is the Laken Riley story. Now, I just want to say this for the record. Any situation where this happens, it's heartbreaking. Laken Riley was a 22-year-old nursing student at the University of Georgia, and she was killed while jogging on campus by an undocumented immigrant who was a criminal. Jose Ibarra was from Venezuela, or is from Venezuela, and he assaulted and killed this girl brutally. And so, of course, the facts around the situation are he entered the United States illegally, was released into the country pending an immigration hearing. And of course, he had a criminal record here in the United States. He had an arrest for shoplifting and failing to appear in court. And so, of course, him killing her is disgusting and it is tragic. And I want to say that for the record, because these real stories, they're affecting people's lives. That's a family right now that's without a child, without a loving daughter. That's absolutely tragic. But the problem is that taking that girl's death and that tragedy and then seizing on it to then paint a picture about all immigrants as being killers, as being criminals, and saying they're coming in by the millions, it's just simply not true. As I mentioned last time we talked, the incarceration rate for native-born Americans is 1.53% compared to 0.85% for undocumented immigrants and 0.47% for legal ones. And with violent crimes, according to the American Immigration Council, immigrants are 25% less likely to be convicted of homicide than native-born Americans. Now, we heard these rumors with, of course, the Aurora, Colorado takeover, where Trump and Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance were making these comments, basically saying that there was a whole takeover of an apartment complex and there was increased tensions and harassment of Latino residents in the area. Now, don't take my word for it. I'm going to play you a very, very quick clip here of some of these comments that were made by Trump, by Miller, and by J.D. Vance. Not just talking about what was going on in Colorado, also talking about people coming into the country, and also talking about Haitian immigrants. Here we go. Go ahead and get this queued up here.
They come from the dungeons, think of that, the dungeons of the third world, from prisons and jails, insane asylums, and mental institutions.
There goes that claim again about insane asylums, mental institutions.
And she has had them resettled beautifully into your community to prey upon innocent American citizens. That's what they're doing. And no place is it more evident than right here.
So as you can see right over here in this particular clip, this is another example that we're talking about of utilizing this narrative about immigrants, talking about them as a whole here. And then using this one tiny example about this Venezuelan gang in Aurora, Colorado to fit the narrative. Here's another clip of Trump talking about immigrants, quote, poisoning the blood of the country, which many people were very concerned because there were allusions to Hitler's speeches in this. and even some statements that he had in Mein Kampf, which are absolutely disgusting. Take a listen.
A lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world, not just in South America, not just the 3 or 4 countries that we think about, but all over the world. They're coming into our country from Africa, from Asia, all over the world. They're pouring into our country. Nobody's even looking at them. They just come in. The crime is going to be tremendous. The terrorism is going to be, and we built a tremendous piece of the wall, and then we're going to build more.
All right. So as you can see here, as I mentioned before, these are narratives that are being used. Notice that he specifically talked about in the narrative here. He specifically was talking about certain populations from Asia, from Africa. These are major concerns because these narratives, they're dangerous and they're disgusting. And as a result of these narratives, as I mentioned before, the people that are going to be put most in harm's way are those that are from minority groups. Carrying on here, here's another clip that we're looking at here. Stephen Miller talking about the situation in Aurora, Colorado, falsely claiming that these people had taken over an entire apartment complex and saying, are these the people you want in your neighborhood? Take a listen.
The media wants you to feel ashamed. They want you to believe you can't complain about what's happening to your town. They want you to shut up. They want you to be quiet. They want you to be silent. We are not gonna shut up. Because we love our country too much. We love our family too much. We love our kids too much to let them grow up in a community and in a country that is run by organized criminal cartels. Not on our watch. Not going to happen. They want you to think that you have to justify. They have to justify why the hell they're bringing the migrants in. And they cannot justify it for this very simple reason. We don't need, in this country, homeless migrants, criminal migrants. We don't need migrants consuming and depleting our public resources, overwhelming our public schools, overwhelming our hospitals, taking over our apartment buildings, and yes, murdering innocent Americans. You have a right to love the community you grew up in. You have a right to love your neighbors as they are. You have a right to want a country that is of, by, and for Americans and only Americans.
See that narrative? Absolutely disgusting. Because it takes the perspective here, it takes a couple of incidents and anecdotes, and it paints an entire broad picture of something that's not reality.
So I will end today with this simple plea and this simple promise. If you do the work, Colorado.
Okay. So once again, we see another example of this in a statement by Trump where he made false claims about immigrants eating cats and dogs during the 2024 presidential debate. Here we go.
To our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the pets. I mean, man, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now, obviously, these claims were spoken to be absolutely false. They were spoken to be absolutely untrue, but Trump doubled down on them. And, of course, there's another situation here in which J.D. Vance did the exact same thing. Here we go.
The American media totally ignored this stuff until Donald Trump and I started talking about cat memes. If I have to, create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do, Dana, because you guys are completely letting Kamala Harris coast.
You just said that.
He said, if I have to create stories, if I have to create narratives, I will. We're in a very, very dangerous place right now in the country. We're in a very, very dangerous place. And these have real life consequences. There were kids in Springfield, Haitian kids, that are here through temporary protected status because they're escaping disaster and what's going on in their country. And they were threatened with bomb threats on picture day at their school. It's such a major problem that we're dealing with because there's a more responsible way to handle this conversation. But what we're doing is these narratives, these things that are being said, it's putting families at risk. It's putting children at risk. It's putting innocent people at risk and in harm's way. And it's taking stories like Laken Riley's story and exploiting that story to achieve their own political desires and to forward false narratives. It's utterly heartbreaking to me because temporary protected status is something that allows people from different countries that are experiencing conflict and natural disaster to work in the U.S. temporarily. Right now, there's 100,000 Haitians that are protected under this, but under the Trump administration, their status is absolutely uncertain. And it's not just affecting Haitian immigrants. It's also affecting Asian immigrants who are experiencing hate crimes in the United States, and also African immigrants who are facing discrimination and also barriers to integration. Trump, in his joint address to Congress, made the statement that there was a particular country he named. He was like, they're coming from a particular country. We've never even heard of it. And they talk about these different countries, these different populations with so much lack of respect and disdain. And so right now, it would appear in the United States of America that the government is not going to do anything positively in the direction of taking care of these people in a proper way. And so because of that, it is our responsibility, I believe, as people to be educated and to stand up for the rights of those that cannot stand up for the rights of themselves. And so, it's a complicated thing that's going on right now. But nobody can say, you cannot look at me right now. We cannot turn a blind eye to what is going on right now. As MLK said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And it is our responsibility, I believe, doesn't matter if you're black, doesn't matter if you're Latino, doesn't matter if you're Asian, doesn't matter if you're white. We are human beings. And it is our responsibility to stand up for the rights of other people who are being oppressed, who are being treated unfairly. The government needs to fix the immigration system. Here's a couple of fixes, a couple of ideas that we can have for this. You can get comprehensive immigration reform, create a clear and accessible pathway for citizenship. Try to fix the system and create a pathway so that you can take names and you can get information about individuals who are here right now, look at their record here in the country, the work that they have been doing. Do they have a criminal record or not? And then create a system for people to gain citizenship and be protected as they're on their way to gaining citizenship, especially those that are contributing to the economy. We also need to ensure that the workplace is protected, that these people have proper and fair wages and workplace protections. And we need to expand protections for people, for dreamers under the DACA program. Once again, as I said before, we need to use drones. And if we're going to have Border Patrol and ICE, border patrol and customs and border enforcement and protection, working, that we need to make sure they have drones, we need to make sure they have the proper technology, and that they have humane treatment trainings to make sure they're treating these people fairly and not like they are animals. Because it's very, very easy for negative rhetoric being used against these people to spark and flame justification for inhumane treatment. I will also say we've got to work on streamlining our asylum process and reducing backlogs. We need to get more judges there, hire more judges to make sure they can properly hear these people's cases. And I think it would be really helpful if we partnered up with different Central and Latin American countries to help to fix the problems that are going on, to address violence, to address poverty and climate change. If we actually were to partner up with Latin and Central American countries and create an economic partnership and help to address some of the issues that are happening in those countries, and really make it on the basis of, hey, you build up your country and you work to deal with the causes of crime there, and we will help to support an economic framework by which we all can succeed that is fair, you'll create economic opportunity in those countries. There's so many things that we can do, like extending temporary worker visas, because right now the cost of construction is going to go up, of agriculture. The cost of all these things is going to increase as a result if we don't fix these problems. Sending people over the border, deporting them, that's not a solution. This mass deportation thing, it's going to negatively affect the economy for all of us. So it is really, really important that we take the time to educate ourselves about these things, not be part of the problem, not be part of this divisive and hateful rhetoric, but that we make a case for laws to be enforced and for systems to be changed, but also for the humane treatment of people who have been exploited by this system. And I just want to say lastly, as somebody, I grew up in the church. I grew up in the church community. And there were a lot of people that are always talking about, the words of Christ and everything like that, and compassion, and how that's part of our belief system. But I have seen such a silence surrounding this issue. I have seen an incredible silence and a lack of empathy surrounding this issue from people who claim the faith. And I just want to speak to them right now, speak to all of you right now that might be listening that fall under that. Whatever happened to us being about justice and righteousness? Whatever happened to us calling out abuses that we see in the world and standing up for what's right? Doesn't matter if it's our party or matches our agenda. Whatever happened to the words of Jesus where he said, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was a stranger and you let me in. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. Whatever you do to the least of these, you've done unto me." If you claim to have such strong a faith, if that's not enough evidence for you, there's a verse in scripture in Leviticus 19 verse 34 that says, "The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were once foreigners in Egypt." What happened to us? In some church circles, we treat Donald Trump like a god. And to all the evangelical leaders out there that have his ear, that are talking to him, where is the accountability? Where is the holding accountable this man who has lied and has used shameful and disgusting rhetoric that is harming communities, that is impacting their lives and is having an impact negatively on all Americans? I think it's time that we got a backbone and stood up for stuff in this world and in this time, even if it might mean us losing our rights, it might mean us losing our privileges, and at some point, God forbid, maybe even us losing our lives. Is the truth more important to you than power and prestige? It's something to think about. Listen, that's all the time that I have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you have any questions, maybe there's anything else that you might want to share about the immigration topic, feel free to shoot us a DM here at Full Circle Podcast at _Full Circle Pod. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen today. So much has gone into this topic, and we can be part of the solution together if we come together and we work to make changes. I'm Joseph again. Have a great one for your favorite brother. I'll see you next time. Peace.